In this video, I am going to discuss the impact that the Scream franchise has had on the horror film genre. Scream came out in 1996 during a time that horror films had become stagnant. Before we get to how Scream is one of the most influential horror movies in cinematic history, let's discuss a brief history of horror films. Each decade starting from the 1890s has its own influential era in horror cinema. Let's start with the 70s. The 70s is considered the rise of exploitation. This is when horror movies started to become more violent and graphic. The most influential movies of this era were Black Christmas, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, The Exorcist, Alien, Jaws, and Suspiria. While each of these movies are influential in their own way, Black Christmas is one of the most influential for the slasher subgenre of horror. While some people consider Psycho to be the first successful slasher film, others consider it to be psychological horror. While Psycho is extremely influential for slasher movies, Black Christmas was the movie responsible for popularizing slasher films and is really what jump-started the subgenre. Black Christmas was a major influence for Scream, a mystery person going around killing people while also making threatening and vulgar phone calls to the victims.
I'll stick my tongue up your pretty pussy. You hang up on me, you'll die just like your mother. Do you want to die, Sydney? Your mother sure didn't.
Of course, Texas Chainsaw Massacre, which came out the same year as Black Christmas, was equally influential, but to a broader audience. While Black Christmas is not the most popular horror movie, it definitely influenced Halloween, resulting in the most popular slasher film of its time. After Halloween released in 1978, the horror genre truly exploded going into the 80s. Here we have some of the most iconic and popular horror films that almost everybody at least has heard about even today, including non-horror fans. The 80s is when movies became more visually visceral and special effects greatly improved with gore. While the 70s had little to no gore, the 80s really upped the gore factor. Most influential movies of this era are Friday the 13th, Nightmare on Elm Street, the Halloween sequels, and Child's Play. Friday the 13th released 8 movies during the 80s alone. These gory cheese fests bring us to the 90s. Most of the 90s was suffering a burnout from the 80s. Other than Silence of the Lambs and Child's Play sequels, people were tired of the same old cheesy schlockfest that was the horror culture at the time. In 1996, Wes Craven, the director of Nightmare on Elm Street, returned to the horror genre with Scream. Scream was a breath of fresh air for horror lovers. It completely revolutionized the horror genre. It's the first film where the characters know they are in a horror movie. This super meta movie references so many iconic horror movies of the past.
You like scary movies?
Uh-huh.
What's your favorite scary movie?
I don't know.
You have to have a favorite. What comes to mind?
Halloween. You know, the one with the guy in the white mask who walks around and stalks babysitters?
Yeah.
What's yours?
Guess.
Nightmare on Elm Street.
Is that the one where the guy had knives for fingers?
Yeah, Freddy Krueger.
Freddy, that's right. I like that movie. It was scary.
Wow, well, the first one was, but the rest sucked.
The characters know the horror tropes and have a horror education to help them survive. The movie satirizes horror tropes from horror movies of the past. It is in so many ways the first movie of its kind. When this movie was being released, they promoted Drew Barrymore as being the lead in the film. She was the top it girl at the time. Everyone thought she was going to be the lead, and instead she was killed off in the first scene. This was just one thing that made Scream stand out from other horror films. We also have a horror movie nerd, Randy. He knows everything about horror movies and even gives a set of rules to survive a horror movie. One of the things that makes Scream stand out is that it gives you the rules of horror films, but then breaks those rules, deconstructing the genre and the movie itself.
There are certain rules that one must abide by in order to successfully survive a horror movie. For instance, number 1, you can never have sex. Big no-no! Big no!
I'm a dead man.
Even in popcorn, sex equals death, okay? Number 2, you can never drink or do drugs. No, the sin factor. It's a sin. It's an extension of number 1. And number 3, never, ever, ever, under any circumstances say, I'll be right back. Because you won't be back.
I'm getting another beer. You want one?
Yeah, sure.
I'll be right back.
You see, you push the laws and you end up dead.
It was also the first movie to have 2 killers. When the second killer is revealed, this shocked horror fans everywhere.
Surprise, Sydney.
This franchise also does a great job at showing that nobody in these films are safe. Just because somebody is a popular actor does not mean they will survive. If somebody is a main character, that does not mean they are safe. They made this apparent when, yet again, a high-profile actress, Jada Pinkett Smith, dies in the opening scene in Scream 2, and when Randy dies also in Scream 2. We see Dewey almost die multiple times, only to be brought out on a stretcher during the last minute of the movie until finally he dies in the 5th installment. This gives real stakes to the characters that we love. You never know who is going to die and who will survive. Randy's death was also very influential at this time. We have 3 legacy characters in this scene, and we think they're safe because they are legacy characters. We then see that safety just start to unravel. They're in broad daylight, in a public place, the characters are together, they're joined by a new character, Joel, Gale's cameraman, so if something does happen, we think it will be him instead of our legacy characters. Then Joel leaves, leaving just our 3 legacy characters. Then they realize they're being watched, so Gale and Dewey leave to find whoever is harassing them, leaving Randy alone. We no longer have this safety net and are worried for Randy. He then gets pulled into the van and murdered in public in broad daylight, making this a huge, shocking scene in the franchise. Scream continues this theme of huge stars or legacy characters being killed in the first scene in Scream 3 and 4. Scream 3 kills off a legacy character, Cotton, while Scream 4 kills off high-profile actors like Alison Brie and Lucy Hale. Scream 2022 is the first film after Wes Craven's death. They do a lot of new things in the 5th and 6th movies as well. Scream 2022 continues with a high-profile actor in the opening scene, Jenna Ortega. However, for the first time in the franchise, the opening attack victim survives, and Jenna Ortega continues on in the movies. Another fairly high-profile actor we see killed off during this film is Dylan Minnette. We have not 1, but 2 legacy character deaths in this movie. Dewey, who at this point we believe the original trio, Sidney, Gale, and Dewey, to be untouchable. They broke that when killing Dewey. We also see Judy Hicks from the 4th movie killed in this one. Since Scream 6 is still in theaters, I will refrain from talking about that one, but it also did a lot of different things that have never been done in the franchise. After Scream 1996 was made, it sparked a whole new revival of the horror genre, inspiring Scary Movie, I Know What You Did Last Summer, and Urban Legend. The horror genre, particularly the slasher genre, wouldn't be what it is today without Scream.